It was the 4th of July, 1990, when a car veered off a local highway near Orange Springs, Florida. From her porch, Rhonda Bailey watched as two women climbed out of the wreckage. One of them, a blonde woman with a bleeding arm, begged her not to call the police. She claimed her father lived nearby. Despite the smashed windshield and obvious damage, they managed to drive the car a short distance before abandoning it and walking off into the woods. When responding deputies arrived, they found the vehicle, a gray 1988 Pontiac Sunbird. Inside, they uncovered a set of clues: bloodstains throughout the interior, a bloody palm print, and missing license plates. A quick check of the VIN revealed the car belonged to Peter Seams, a man reported missing the month before. This was no isolated incident. Witnesses across Florida had seen these same two women, driving stolen cars and pawning belongings of other missing men. Investigators soon identified one of them, Tyria Moore. But the other woman wasn't so easy to pin down. She had a trail of aliases: Cammie Marsh Green, Susan Blahovec, and Lori Gordon, to name a few. The real breakthrough came when deputies matched fingerprints from pawn receipts to the bloody prints in the abandoned car. Those prints belonged to someone already in the system: Aileen Wuornos. The hunt for the so-called damsel of death was on. On January 8, 1991, undercover officers Mike Joyner and Dick Martin, posing as bikers named Bucket and Drums, finally caught a break. For weeks, investigators had been chasing leads pointing to the Port Orange area, where pawnshop records and witness sightings placed Aileen Wuornos. The pressure was mounting, and time was running out. But that night, they finally spotted her. Inside the Port Orange pub, Aileen stood alone by the jukebox, sipping her beer. Bucket and Drums watched closely from their parked Jeep. They knew her face, etched into their minds after months of frustration and dead ends. The scars on her forehead and every detail matched the witness descriptions perfectly. Bucket entered the bar first, blending into the dim, smoky atmosphere. He approached Aileen casually, fed quarters into the jukebox, and struck up a conversation. Then he invited her to dance. She accepted. As they swayed to the music, Drums sat quietly at the bar, watching everything unfold. They had her attention now. They just had to keep her close. As Aileen danced with Bucket inside the pub, Drums stepped outside and radioed the command center at Pirates Cove. Lead investigator Jerry Thompson got the update. They had her. The location was confirmed, and the operation was on track. Just 10 minutes later, the operation took a dangerous turn. Two Port Orange officers, completely unaware of the undercover sting, pulled Aileen out of the bar. They began questioning her about a stolen vehicle. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. Drums' voice crackled over the line to Thompson.
Port Orange cops just pulled her outside. What the heck is going on?
The secrecy of the operation was now backfiring. Even local law enforcement had been kept in the dark, which made incidents like this inevitable. Acting quickly, Thompson called a supervisor who intervened, ordering the officers to stand down. By then, Aileen's identity, under the alias Cammie Green, had already been confirmed in the system. But with no choice, the officers complied, letting her go on a flimsy excuse. Aileen re-entered the bar, where Bucket waited, giving her a questioning glance. What the hell was all that about? She leaned back, shaking her head. They thought I was that serial killer. You know, the one shooting all those guys. Then they started hassling me because I don't have a place to stay. In cops. Bucket played along, waving her over and offering to buy her a beer, shaking his head in disbelief. She introduced herself as Lee Blahovec, but admitted to giving the cops a fake name, Cammie Marsh Green. It was obvious to Joyner that she'd been drinking long before he and Drums arrived. As the beers kept coming, Aileen grew louder and far more talkative. "Look at this," Aileen said, shoving up her sleeve to reveal a scar. "Got that in a wreck." Before anyone could react, she yanked up the front of her blouse, exposing her stomach, casually mentioning how she'd been shot with a .22. She finished her beer and suddenly stood up, grabbing her suitcase. "I gotta get going, just down the way," she said, brushing off Bucket's offer for a ride. She gave a brief nod and walked out the door. Bucket and Drums said nothing, silently watching her vanish into the night. Wuornos walked south along Ridgewood Avenue. Behind her, a beige late-model car crept forward, its headlights off, matching her pace. At the surveillance command, frustration boiled over. 2 agents had taken it upon themselves to tail her in plain sight, breaking every rule of surveillance. If Wuornos hadn't been drunk, she would have noticed immediately. An angry call went out. The agents were ordered off the street and pulled from the operation within minutes. It was the second close call of the night, and the team's tension was stretched to its breaking point. Meanwhile, at exactly 10:10, Aileen pushed through the doors of the Last Resort, unaware of the chaos around her. The Last Resort, a gritty biker bar on the west side of Ridgewood, stood as a fortress of Harley-Davidson pride. Its parking lot overflowed with pickups and motorcycles, while inside, the low ceilings, buzzing pool tables, and walls plastered with memorabilia set the scene. The hard-edged regulars paid little attention as 2 undercover officers slipped in quietly. At 10:30 p.m., Bucket and Drums, still posing as bikers, waved to Aileen and handed her a beer, keeping their movements casual. Across town, the lead investigator weighed the team's next steps in a tense phone call with a supervisor. Allowing the undercover officers to drive Wuornos home was immediately ruled out. She was too dangerous, and sending in unwired officers was a risk no one was willing to take. But what if she left with someone else? Could they afford to let her out of sight? The operation was balanced on a knife's edge. Without Tyria Moore or the murder weapon, it still wasn't time to move in. Outside, 5 surveillance units covered every exit. A senior officer parked nearby with a clear view knew the place well. Fenced in with only 2 exits at the front and minimal cover in the back. For now, Wuornos was surrounded. But the situation felt fragile. One wrong move, and the entire operation could collapse. January 9th had already arrived. The Last Resort had closed at 2, and Bucket and Drums had left. Yet at 3 a.m., there was still no sign of Wuornos leaving. She had likely bedded down in one of the old trailers behind the bar. At dawn, Bucket and Drums would be wired for another encounter, engaging Wuornos without letting her slip away to an unknown destination. With Tyria Moore still missing and too many unknowns about Wuornos' methods, the priority remained gathering information. Nearby, a state-of-the-art surveillance van, equipped with the latest cameras, recorders, and wireless receivers, stood ready near the tattoo parlor north of the bar. 2 units held their positions at the front and back of the Last Resort, while the rest of the team regrouped, preparing for what daylight would bring. By late morning, the surveillance team caught their first sign of movement. Wuornos was finally up, moving around the bar. It was her first activity all day, and for the investigators watching closely, the tension began to rise. By mid-afternoon, the surveillance operation at the Last Resort was in full swing. From the cramped surveillance van nearby, backup officers monitored the scene, listening to the bar chatter, jukebox music, and clinking glasses picked up by the tiny microphones hidden on Bucket and Drums. Inside, Aileen Wuornos swayed drunkenly to the sound of Randy Travis echoing through the bar. Her voice rose as she sang along with the jukebox. "I'm digging up bones, exhuming things better left alone." The bartender, a burly man nicknamed Cannonball, sneered at her erratic performance, muttering something dismissive under his breath. Wuornos snapped back with slurred defiance, brushing back her hair and jabbing at the air with her chin. Bucket leaned in, cutting through her rant. "Take it easy," he said casually, dangling a motel key in front of her. Wuornos paused, eyeing the key, weighing its promise. Bucket and Drums, supposed dealers she'd met the day before, seemed to offer her something. Maybe a chance at business, maybe just a place to rest. After a night spent on a beat-up car seat, any opportunity seemed worth chasing. Drums stood, signaling to Bucket that he'd be back. "Make sure Lee's set," he said casually. Wuornos leaned at the bar, her eyes glinting with a mix of weariness and expectation as the room buzzed around her. Drums stepped out of the last resort. He moved quickly toward the Jeep, parked at the edge of the lot, speaking into his mic.
The pig roast kicks off after dark. More bikers are showing up. It's going to get packed. We need to move soon.
The chaos they'd anticipated was building fast. A yard surrounded by fences, 9 old Hondas dangled from an oak tree like strange ornaments, a bonfire waiting to blaze. Add booze, narcotics, and a crowd of rowdy bikers, and the result would be a volatile, uncontrollable scene. From the command center came a firm warning.
If she gets on a bike and rides out, we'll lose her. This ends now. Take her.
Bucket suggested that she ride with them, clean up, and then come back for the party. Wuornos agreed, finishing her beer and grabbing her worn jacket. The trio walked toward the parking lot. Across the street, the surveillance team stood ready. A voice crackled over the radio.
Move in.
A sleek 280ZX screeched into the lot, cutting off their path. Doors flew open. 2 plainclothes officers stepped out, badges flashing in the dim light. From the other side, a marked sheriff's car pulled in, backup swarming like a closing net. Within seconds, 5 officers surrounded them. One officer stepped forward, his voice firm. Wuornos froze but kept her composure, her expression unreadable as her mind raced. She showed no panic, stammering a few words, claiming the car and gun weren't hers, feigning confusion to buy time and keep control of the situation. The cuffs locked around her wrists with a cold finality. From the bar, Cannonball yelled, asking if they wanted her things. Wuornos didn't flinch. She barely blinked as the scene played out around her. In her mind, she stayed untouchable. "They've got nothing, no prints, no witnesses. Lock me up, you'll never figure it out." But they had. If you followed this hunt to the end, grab that subscribe button and give this video a like. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.